Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to our awesome talk. It's going to be pretty amazing. I'm just going to throw that on out there about the neurodivergent career path and what you can do if you're neuro-spicy to spice up your career life, to figure out navigating the neurotypical work world. How do you figure out what you want to do? How do you communicate your skills? All the things we're going to talk about it. And I have an awesome guest for this. It's Miss Cathlyn Stahl, and she's going to introduce herself and tell you exactly how awesome she is.
Thanks, Catherine. All right, so my name is Cathlyn. I am a career mentor at Pathrise currently. I have been in the career coaching space for over 5 years now. I actually started my career in sports psychology and working with athletes on their mental performance as it relates to sport. So did that for a little bit, and it was great. I just couldn't find a job. So then I transitioned into the education world and found a job, which was great. And that's what actually brought
Jobs are cool.
Jobs are great. After that, that's where I started career coaching when I got into the education world. So I began my career coaching journey with Team USA athletes, our Olympians, our Paralympians, our developmental team folks, people that were 18 looking to find a job while they were training and competing, all the way up to like 70-year-olds who were like, I just want a fun part-time job. What can I do? So I worked across every industry under the sun, which was really fun. Worked with a lot of amazing people there. After our contract had ended, I transitioned more into the boot camp space, and that's where I started to specialize more in tech and the tech sector as a whole. So through my time at the boot camp, it was a good time. I learned a lot, got to specialize more in that sector, like I mentioned, and that's kind of where I'm still in right now, still in the tech sector, which is great. Still an advocate in a lot of different ways for a lot of different causes and a lot of different things that are important and for me, like mental health, LGBTQ rights, people with disabilities, accommodations, neurodiversity. Obviously, I'm neurodiverse, so I care a lot about this population too. I'm a part of it, and
right. Yeah, it makes sense, right? And by the way, for anybody that doesn't know me that's watching this, so I'm a national people operations consultant. I've been doing that for well over a decade. Before that, I was in recruiting and TA. Before that, I got everything under the sun. It would take too long to list all the things. I also am an international speaker on the topics of neurodiversity and innovating HR and inclusion and HR tech, which is super fun. And that's what I do. And we're both neurodivergent people and different neurodivergent people. So I have 4 diagnoses. One is actually a medical condition that causes neurodisruptions, and that's my seizure disorder. I then have misophonia, which means that certain sounds actually cause neuropathway disruption. It's not the most fun thing. I have obsessive compulsive disorder, and I do have bipolar 1 as well. So do you feel like disclosing today, Miss Cathlyn?
Absolutely. So I am ADHD. I am more of I have a little bit more of the inattentive symptoms comparatively to the bouncing off the wall symptoms. Can't remember what that's called. Hyperactivity. That's the word I'm looking for. I believe it's been a while since I've been tested, but I believe I'm borderline still on dyslexia and also autism. So it's one of those things that, with women, we mask a lot, and it's a little bit more difficult for diagnoses as women. So for me, particularly with ADHD, I actually got diagnosed later in life, but was tested as early as 8 because they saw things happening at 8, and then I wasn't tested and actually confirmed until I was in college. So it took that long in order to get that diagnosis. So that's why there were a lot of things that I was borderline on, that they were like, I don't know, we're not really sure. She's like exhibiting some of these symptoms, but not fully, so we can diagnose her and like start that process. But I firmly believe a lot of that is just to the way that we have to work around it and the way that we've had to adapt to be in a neurotypical world.
And it is true, I think, for a lot of neurodivergence with the masking, but it's a little bit, it is a little different for women too, because the stereotypes are, and because we manifest differently. So people won't even recognize this as the thing either. So it's like this bizarre. And just so anybody knows, the diagnostic processes didn't really include, and the standards didn't really include the variations for women until shamefully recently. So like the last few years, kind of recently. So it has been a very different diagnostic process. Also, there are a lot of people who are not getting diagnosed till they're adults. So a lot of people just don't know. They just are like, oh, I must just be weird. And then they're like, oh, no, I just have autism, or I just have ADHD, or like oh, like that's all it is.
Yeah. Exactly. The
Yeah.
diagnosis has changed so much too. From the time that I was diagnosed, they were saying, hey, we don't use ADD anymore, we use ADHD. And I was like, but I don't think I have the hyperactivity component. And they're like, well, it's a bucket term, it doesn't matter. And then in more
You're like, but I still feel like it does matter though.
I'm like, I think it does, but okay, whatever. Let's maybe look at the DSM. Have you looked at that recently? How about we look at that first?
God.
But in more recent years, I've done more research because I actually worked with a therapist who specialized in working with ADHD populations. So that's where I learned a lot more about my own ADHD, how it manifests specifically for me. My husband also has ADHD, but his manifests differently than mine.
Completely. Yes.
Completely. Yes. Not just because he's a man, but also because just him and I think differently. We have very different triggers, for example. We have very different things that we kind of lean into on a daily basis. So even in more recent years, I've learned that, they actually have 3 different types of ADHD now. It's inattentive, hyperactivity, and hybrid. And so I fall a little bit into hybrid just because I have some of the hyperactivity components, but much more heavily fall on the inattentive. And it would have been great to know that upon diagnosis versus just, here's your diagnosis. Have fun. See you later. Have a good rest of your life.
I can actually relate to that because, so my thing has changed names like umpteen times. So when I was very first diagnosed with bipolar, it was not called bipolar. It was called manic depression. Now it's called bipolar. Then they were like, oh, by the way, there's multiple types of bipolar. I'm like, God dang it. So I have to like go figure out all the different things, right? So yeah, it can be super frustrating. And so the neurodivergent path and careers can be interesting for us because, and especially if you're late in life, so you didn't even like know what was going on, it can make it a lot harder to accommodate yourself. It can make it a lot harder to communicate your needs to people. So, I mean, it can be complicated. So that's why we're here today. We're going to talk to you about how to help figure out what you can do, how to get there, how to communicate your awesome skills, how to not help people not be weird towards you. Like I'm like, there's good weird, but then there's times that you're like, oh, why are you saying that? That's so very bizarre.
Exactly.
So, and those are the things that we do not want. So let's start with this. When somebody is saying, because I hear this all the time, I have so many passions. I want to do all of it. Okay, but that's not going to really make for a good way to make a living. Like that's not really a job, just doing everything in most cases. So how do you recommend that people start to narrow that stuff down?
Oh, I love this question. I've worked with so many people, specifically athletes, who have said, I have a lot of different ideas and a lot of different passions, but I just don't know which one to go. Where do I go? Tell me which route I should take. And I say, no. Absolutely not. I'm not telling you which one to take, but I can help you get there. We can help figure it out together. So a lot of the work that I lean into is the strengths-based work. So what are you really good at, and how can we use those strengths in a position and find a position or a role or a career that aligns with utilizing those strengths? Because the beauty of neurodiversity is that everyone has a superpower. It's just, what is your superpower? Yeah. And for me, I've had to figure out what my own superpower is only because of trial and error in some ways. Have conversations with people and be like, oh, I guess I am really good at that. I never realized that. Oh, okay. Wow, I just thought everyone was good at that. And then you realize, no, they're not. So I really had to do some of that work in my own life and my own career to find a way to understand how can I take a look at some of the things that I do really well and apply it to a job? How can I apply it to a company that also makes sense for me?
And I want to pause on this real quick to hit on the other aspect that is so very tied into this. Because yes, strengths, and I want to talk about missions here in a second. But so I am really good at convincing people to do what they need to do, right? I'm great at leading a project. Like nobody can like lead a project, right? I can be very motivating, that kind of thing. So I was like, oh, hands-on management, that's for Cathlyn. Okay. No, it's not. And here's why. People exhaust me.
Yeah.
And once I really like honed different skills and all this, I was actually a pretty darn decent hands-on manager. I'm a great executive, but I was a decent hands-on manager. But it exhausted me, and I legitimately spent half my time just trying not to punch my team in their faces. And it wasn't because they stunk, it's just that they were exhausting me, and I couldn't just, they were so needy and just always with the things, and I'm like, this is too much humaning for me, and I don't like it. And so just because you technically have the right skills to do something does not actually mean that on a day-to-day basis this is going to be a good match for you.
Yes, I cannot echo that hard enough, because absolutely right. I mean, I've been in roles where I pride myself on being a really good communicator, and I've done speaking engagements, and most of the work that I do in career coaching is working one-on-one with people. I've also done it in group coaching, and I excel in group coaching. I excel in individual coaching, but I'm the same way. Like, I am an extrovert only about by this much. Like, if you take the line and the middle is like dead middle, and you've got introvert on one side and extrovert, I lean a little bit more on the extroverted side, but those kinds of conversations all day long can exhaust me, and all of a sudden I'm drained. So I've also considered in my own career, like, are there ways that I can mediate through that and kind of create a schedule that aligns better with that while still being able to fill my cup and having time for other things? Or is it something that I need to maybe be in a different type of role that isn't so client facing? And that's something that you sometimes have to figure out as you do it. And that's where that trial and error can come through. Because early on in my career, I was presenting like crazy. I was going out, probably doing at least 1 to 3 a week, either locally or traveling across the country for it. And the travel got too much for me. I couldn't handle it any longer. But also just doing the same thing over and over. It was the same type of presentation, the same type of content. That got so monotonous for me so quickly. And for people with, ADHD or any kind of neurodiversity, you're just like, okay, great. This is the same thing over and over. I can't do this anymore. I need something
next. Yeah. Next.
I kind of mix somehow. And it is a lot about trial and error. So it's a little bit about your strengths, but it's also a little bit about figuring out, like, can I do something that sustains me for a little bit? And maybe that's fine. And I can hone in on other skills while I'm there, where I'm on, maybe it's a stepping stone opportunity that gets you to where you want to go down the line more so.
And let's be honest, you cannot be truly self-aware unless you are aware of the things that don't work for you.
Absolutely.
And so you have to, like you said, spend as much time understanding those things as you do the strengths. And it's not even about that you have a weakness. It's just that, like we said, you could be great at it, but maybe it's not something you need to be doing every day. That's just not a thing for you. Like, I'm great with kids, but if you put my misophonic self into a daycare, I would burn it down. Like, it would be so bad. Okay. And my sister, on the other hand, is a wonderful, wonderful asset to a daycare. And it's not that I hate children or anything. I love kids. They're great little people, but it's just, no, that's too much for me. So the next thing, which is also leads me into actually my next point of, let's get real about the fact that there are going to be some situations that are just never going to be a fit for you. And it's not that the company is broken. It's not that you're broken. It's just that because of your own makeup, that is not the right fit for you. And there is no amount of accommodation that can make that okay for you.
100%. Yes. Yes. And, one of the things that I've done is one of the certifications that I have is I'm a certified practitioner and facilitator in the strong interest inventory assessment. And so we basically take some strengths and kind of look at what have you done previously? What are things? So we did this a lot with athletes. And the top thing that athletes would say is, like, the number one career choice that my data pointed out was that I should be an athlete. And we're like, yeah, that kind of makes sense because you've been doing it for 10, 20, 30 years so far. Of course it makes sense. Your values, your passions, and your strengths all align in that space. But the way that the strong operates is that it goes into likes and dislikes. So when you're taking in the strong, it's basically like, how much would you like being an actuary? And you might be like, none. I don't like that whatsoever. So you disagree with that choice. And so then it helps define those kinds of avenues for you. And one of the benefits that I like of the strong is that it actually goes into environmental preferences. So are you somebody that likes to work alone? Or you like to work in teams? Are you somebody that likes to learn through doing books or reading resources? Or do you like more hands-on approaches? And so basically we can find an environment that more aligns based on those work preferences.
And that is so important, by the way. And folks, getting this kind of knowledge for yourself, whether you do it through the strong testing or otherwise, this is very important, because being able to communicate this to your employers is vital. Because if they're trying to train you by talking to you and you're a kinetic learner,
big difference.
it's gonna debunk that it's not gonna work.
Yeah.
So the next thing when it comes to picking an environment, so we talked about, like, we got to think about actual environment. Like, are you light sensitive, sound sensitive, whatever, strengths, and missions. That's one of the things I always be like, what are your personal missions? What are the things that light you up inside? So like, I am entirely too excited about HR, right? Like I literally was the little girl who played HR with her mother and like set up little conventions and interview processes. I even fired her one time when I was 6 years old. Not as my mother. I want to be very clear about that. I fired her as my pretend employee. And she was so proud. She was so proud. And she was telling me like what a great job I did. And then she critiqued it. And told me how to do it better next time. It was so great. So like, clearly HR was built into me, right? And then neurodiversity, the more I learned about it and understood it, that became a passion. I started getting more certifications. I started diving in, right? So those are the things that light me up. So I love my work. I wake up excited every single day to do work. Like that's my jam, right? And so finding the things that are your missions in life and or that light you up. Oh God.
Yes. Oh, are you frozen? I'm frozen, I think. Can you hear me, Catherine? You're back.
Oh my gosh, the drama. So my phone just fired me.
Oh, no.
My other phone was like, no, ma'am.
No, thank you.
This is enough of you.
How dare you on a Friday? How dare you?
I know. It's so funny. I love it. But yeah, so I just really, mission alignment is a thing that you have to connect to. So now we've kind of talked about like the broad scope, like how to start to narrow it down. What excites you? Let's get real about who you are and what's going on. That type of thing. And so next is, all right, now how do I find the thing?
Yeah. Let me go back to the mission piece for just a quick second.
Oh yeah, sure.
Well, so what I tell everybody is that you're going to know what you don't like immediately. So let's start there. Let's start with the things that you're like, this is absolutely off the table. I don't want to be a product manager. Great, cool. Check. We don't need to look into those opportunities. So with athletes, a lot of times I'll ask them like, what is it that you don't want to do? And some of them will come to me and say, I don't want to be a coach. I know that other people in my sport want to be a coach, but I don't want to be a coach. Great. We can cross that off the list. I'm not going to talk you into it. If you don't want that and you're not passionate and excited about it,
do this job that you absolutely hate. It'll be awesome.
I'd be a terrible career coach if I did that. I'm like, no. Let's go with the job you hate. So I tell everybody, start with the list of things that you don't like, because that's so easy to start with. For me, math is not my jam. So I'm never going to be a mathematician, period. That's not going to happen. I'm never going to teach math. So that takes out some of those maybe stronger components of positions that might be utilizing math. So as far as how to get there, I'm going to use that as my segue here of like, we can start with that list of what don't you like, and then kind of put a list together of, well, here are some things that I'm interested in. Here are some things that maybe I've heard about, but I need to do more research into. And, what I tell a lot of folks when we're in that career exploration phase, it can take months, it can take years. It's very dependent on the person. And also, it has to be when the person's ready to go through that process, because it's a deep process. It's a heavy process for a lot of fellows or a lot of folks in general. And in that space, I share like, I've worked with people who we go through career exploration in 3 to 6 months, and then others it takes 6 to 12 months, maybe minimum, or even longer. Sometimes it takes closer to 2 years because maybe there's life priorities coming up. Maybe they're like, you know what, I just need something right now to suffice, and that's fine. I'll just do this for right now, and then
that's okay. And I would that is okay.
Absolutely.
You just need to pay the bills, knock yourself out. Yeah.
100%. So what I tell folks is, okay, let's start with the things that you don't like. Let's take them off the table. We don't even have to consider them. Now let's talk about the things that you're like, I don't know, I'd be interested in this, but we need to research more. We need to dig into that further. And then maybe let's create a maybe list. You know what? I don't know much about this, but it's a maybe consideration. So we can have comments.
And I'm curious your thoughts on this, because one of the things I always tell people to do for the kind of the maybe or the I don't know, because there's always the stuff you just don't know. So make the list of your strengths, the things that make you passionate, and just start throwing together combinations of those words into Google and see what it spits back out at you.
Yeah.
Like jobs with blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Or jobs for blah, blah. And oh my God, you will be surprised. I've had people go, oh my gosh, there are jobs I never heard of and I'm perfect for them. Like this is so me. So researching other options. I also like to tell people go to like career event, even just go to conferences for like small businesses, something where there's going to be a wide variety of something. And even if you know, like, for instance, I want to do tech, great. Go to some tech conventions, figure out what you want to do in tech. Right. Go to, if you're just like, I really, really don't know, go to some broad stroke events that are just like business expos and stuff, and just spend some time talking to people.
I've got maintenance knocking on my door. I'm so sorry. Do you mind?
It's okay. It's okay. I will carry it for a moment. When you come back, we'll be good. So that was so funny. So we're just having, it's the day of technical issues. It's Friday and everyone seems to know that, including our technology. So thinking about planning this kind of stuff out, throw information to Google, do some searches, get creative with it, go talk to people, get on LinkedIn. Communicate with people. That's the next piece. So you kind of get a feel for what you want to do. Get on LinkedIn and find people that do it. Reach out and connect to them. Start conversations. Follow their content. Comment. Even message them directly. Just say, hey, I'm thinking about breaking into this field. Do you mind sharing with me a little bit about it? Would that be okay? It's one of those things, and especially if you've been engaging with their content for a while, a lot of times people are very happy to help you out. And I think it's something that's often overlooked is the value of really spending time with people that do that. If you can get a chance to, see if you can get a chance to like go on site with somebody for a little bit and spend time with them. But really kind of get a feel. If this is something you want to really pivot to, come to understand it. I have done so many talks with our conversations. I mean, I've done so many conversations with people where they are just determined that they want to get into recruiting or HR, right? And I start that out, but I go, okay, so what makes you want to get into this line of work? And with recruiting, one of the top answers I hear is, I want to help people get jobs. And the first thing I say to them is, then you're getting into the wrong field. And they look so perplexed. I said, here's why I'm saying that. If your whole motivation is the joy of helping somebody find employment, this isn't the field for you. Recruiting is that you're trying to fill the open jobs. It's about the job. It's about filling those open jobs. Perfect timing, because I'm about to reference you. So, so a recruiter's job is to fill those open positions. And that means you're going to turn down about 99.5% of your candidates or more, not hire them on. So if your whole motivation for getting into something is, I want to help people get more jobs, recruiting ain't it. You know what is it? Cathlyn's job. Her job is what you ought to be doing. Career coaching, that's the job for you, or resume writing or something like that. That's the job for you. A placement agency sometimes have people that work on both sides of the aisle, that type of thing. But recruiting ain't it. And so taking that time, the value to speaking to somebody who's already in the job, who really understands it, they can help you understand what it actually is versus the myths, versus the misunderstandings. They can kind of give you the ins and outs and get multiple people's perspectives. That's just one of my biggest tips when you're actually found the thing and now you're thinking of getting into it. What are some of your other tips?
Oh my gosh. First of all, I love that because my mentor, one of my mentors, she's still one of my good friends. She and I work together, and she's been in the career coaching field for probably 10 years, actually probably closer to 15 years at this point. And there's so many things that when we were working together, she would tell me, you know, if somebody tells me that they're interested in, let's say, recruiting, because you just mentioned it, if they're interested in recruiting, go have 10 informational interview conversations with 10 different recruiters, because each recruiter is going to have a different experience at their company. And I live and die by that. Maybe not 10 all the time, depending on people's bandwidth and whatnot. But I tell them, like, you need to get more of an understanding as what this job is on a day-to-day level, but also how does it vary at this company compared to this company, at a big, ginormous tech company versus a small startup. It's going to vary. Now there's going to be responsibilities that obviously align, and that, you know, certain skills that might be required of the position, but you might have completely different experiences. And it's something I tell anybody, like any folks, sorry, I keep using fellows because that's the terminology we use here at Pathrise.
That's okay.
But, and I swear it's not genderized. It's just everyone's a fellow, like a fellowship type thing.
Yeah. I got
you know, Lord of the Rings, love it. So at this moment, I tell everybody, like, we need to have conversations with people, but keeping in mind that their experience is unique to them. So if they're unhappy about their job or unhappy about their culture or the organization as a whole, that can't muddy up the entire water that we're trying to get from, because that's just their one experience at maybe their company currently. But maybe if you talk with other people, you get a more of a view of what's happening.
100%. And if you were working in a field where there are people who do it independently versus in a corporate setting, talk to people who do both.
Yes.
Because it's going to be a very different type of conversation. Another thing too, so for neurodivergent people, another thing that is going to be very important is to understand accessibility in different jobs, inclusivity in different jobs, and not just organizations, but as a job as a whole. Like, okay, you've been in this career, you can talk to somebody and say, okay, you've been in this career, you've been at 5 different companies doing it. What are the consistent issues that you've experienced? Maybe find somebody with your own diagnosis to reach out to, because a lot of people on LinkedIn now will just flat out say, hey, I don't know, I'm a data analyst and I have ADHD, or, oh God, wouldn't that be weird? I just pictured, I'm like, that would be the most interesting person. I kind of want to meet the person who has ADHD and does data analytics. But anyway, I have so many questions for them. Maybe, you know, maybe they have autism and they do sales. Maybe they have bipolar and they do teaching. I don't know, whatever it is you're into. But a lot of times people will out themselves on LinkedIn nowadays, which is wonderful. I love it. And so you can even perhaps find somebody with your diagnosis to speak to that can relate, and or reach out to somebody like myself or Cathlyn, who speaks to a lot of people and can maybe introduce you to somebody who can kind of help you understand. But I think that that's important too, right? So I know somebody, when I use the example of autism and sales, a lot of people have gone, oh my God, that's good. That must not work very well. I'm like, no, it works very well, actually. It works. It's shockingly well, actually. I know what a lot of people would think, but it's very different. But what I have done is when other people with autism were interested in sales, I've introduced them to a couple of folks I know with the diagnosis who've done it, so that they can prepare them for, these are the things that may stress you out. These are the things, it just kind of walks them through it from a different perspective. It also helped them to understand what to disclose and when.
Yes.
And it gave some really good insight, especially for like client facing roles. Sometimes you're going to need to disclose, or else they're going to be like, what's happening here? I don't understand this. And so you're just going to have to kind of get at that pattern of it. And so that leads me into my next question for you is disclosure. And so sometimes with some jobs, I mean, I'm a very big person of it should be your own choice.
Yes.
Even if you need to ask for accommodation, frankly, I think companies being nosy is ridiculous. I don't think you need a diagnosis for that. You should just know what they need and how it helps. But with some jobs, realistically, there can be very good reason to disclose. So when somebody is neurodivergent and looking into a new career path, right? What's some of the advice that you would give about disclosure, both as you're researching it and then also as you're going through the interview and hire process?
You know what? I lean into heavily, it's your own choice. However, if you need accommodations at any point in the process, ask. ask, because I have asked myself for accommodations in an interview process before. And, there's times where that can
No,
be
wait, I'm curious real quick. How did that go exactly? Are you like actually talking to yourself? Like, I'm
I was interviewing for my current company actually over a year ago. And I actually asked for an accommodation because the way that they were going to set up the final round of interviews, it was a virtual onsite. And so I was going to be doing 3 back-to-back interviews, and each of them were going to be an hour long. And I said, no, Cathlyn can't do that. Cathlyn does not do that. First of all, if I do 3 hours of back-to-back work without taking a single break, a brain break, bathroom break, food break,
not good.
like that, like, no, I can't usually. And so what I said was, and they were really accommodating in the messaging.
Oh, I see what you mean. I'm sorry. I misunderstood you. I thought you meant like you asked yourself for an accommodation. And I was like.
And I approved it, of course.
Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead with your story.
You're good. So at the time, they had actually sent me the email like, hey, just so you know, if it is easier, we can break this up over 2 days, 3 days, depending on your schedule. And so I said to them, like, my availability at the time was a little bit tight too with the job that I was working. So I said to them, listen, I would really like to request, kindly, I'd like to request an accommodation. I didn't disclose that I have ADHD. I just simply said, I would like to request an accommodation. And is it possible we can set this up over 2 days with no more than an hour a piece for these conversations? If they tend to go over to like an hour 15 or an hour and a half calls, I'd prefer that we have a 15-minute break in between. And so I very much went in with a very clear plan of like, here's what would work best for me, but I want to be really understanding that your schedules might not totally align with what this works for me. So if we do have to do it all within 1 day, can we make them a little bit shorter, maybe 45 minutes instead, so I can have 10 to 15-minute breaks in between each of those?
I love the compromise. I love the compromise. That makes me so happy.
And I've worked with so many athletes in particular where we've had to ask for accommodations for either physical or invisible disabilities. And for invisible disabilities, it's a lot harder to ask for accommodations in the way of you specifically feeling comfortable, because nobody can see you from the outside looking in. If they were to never talk to me, they couldn't like look at me on the street and say, oh, Cathlyn has ADHD. Like, there's no way that you can pick that up unless I'm wearing a shirt that says it, But in those ways, like with an invisible disability, we kind of have to advocate for ourselves a little bit more comparatively to physical disabilities where people are making assumptions already. And they're assuming, oh, you have a missing leg from your knee down. We assume that you need accommodations to use the elevator instead of using the stairs up 6 flights. So that's a little bit more transparent, but at the same time, accommodations are accommodations. And I tell every single person, if you at any point feel like you need an accommodation in the process, it just has to be reasonable. Ask.
Yes. So, and that is the thing, reasonable too. So let's hit on that, because I get asked all the time, what does reasonable mean?
Yeah.
And here's the tragedy. There's not actually a definition for that.
No. Here's
the
definition that I give though. I say, if you are a person that, let's say that you are a person who does not require a handicap spot at a parking facility. Let's say that you're going to interview on site at some place and you request a handicap spot or a parking spot when maybe it's downtown parking or limited parking in general. That's not a reasonable request. Okay, because you do not actually need that. However, if you are a person in a wheelchair, for example, and you need that because that's a closer spot for you, it helps you get your wheelchair out, you can roll into the building, and you request that they have elevators, or if they don't have elevators, you request that they meet on the first floor. Those are reasonable accommodations. And the thing is, you have to do a little bit of research to see what's reasonable with the disability that you have as well.
And you can also, but honestly, I tell people it's common sense. And by the way, the way that the courts rule it is, as long as it does not produce an undue burden onto the employer, it is a reasonable accommodation. Okay, so, or violate some other type of law, like the handicap sticker. Like, dude, if you don't have a handicap placard, you just cannot park in those spaces. Too bad for you. And that's not even up to the employer, by the way. That's the government. But it is a matter, really and truly, if it's obviously common sense, it's reasonable. Like you asking for the breaks between, well, that was a lot of, I mean, that's a common thing to go, I'd like some breaks between a 4-hour like session here. That's a very reasonable, nobody's going to think twice about that. it's a very common sense thing. There have been times a camera off is a very common sense. And by the way, nobody has the right to tell you camera on. I just want to put that out there because some companies try to act shady. Well, we can require it. Actually, no, you can't. That has not been upheld.
No, and that's an accommodation that I've talked about with certain neurodiverse populations, because let's take people with autism as an example. Historically, people with autism can struggle with eye contact. So let's talk about a virtual interview. If you're trying to either, there's some recommendations that you stare at the camera. There's some that you just stare at the screen instead. I tend to say if you're staring at the camera, it feels awkward for all of us involved. But also, that's me. I know other coaches who are like, no, stare at the camera. And I'm like, you're not going to catch me staring at the camera. I'm going to be honest. Because it makes it harder for me to read body language for the other person, for example, or just reading the room. So I tell everybody, like, that's a great example. Like, people with autism can struggle with the eye contact.
Yes.
And so that is an element where if we can take that out of the situation, we'll interview better. So all we have to do is say, hey, listen, I have a disability that is under the American Disability Act. That's all you have to say. You never have to disclose what the exact disability is. And if they ask, ooh, red flag.
First of all, that. Also, you don't even really start with not even saying that. That's my encouragement. Don't even say that much. Just this is something that would help me to interview more effectively. Start with that. Then we can progress a little bit down the road. Another one too, this was funny. And it was for somebody with ADHD. So my show, I had on a guest that I've had her on multiple times, by the way, Dr. J, she's been on my show multiple times. She's absolutely freaking terrific. And she does everything sitting on her yoga ball. And so the entire time that you were talking to her,
she's bouncing.
Like this. And it's fantastic. And that's just what she does, but that's how she focuses. Exactly. And so one thing and she's very good about communicating. I sit on this so that I can focus on what you're saying. This helps me to get excess energy out. That allows me to focus on what you're saying. Sometimes if you just let them know how it helps, that can really make a difference. I'm asking for this so that this will happen.
Yes.
That really tends to work because it helps people to make it make sense in their brain. And then the why or the diagnosis and all that can a lot of times, not always, a lot of times just float out the window because it's like, okay, I'm already getting it. That makes sense to me. Okay, cool.
Absolutely.
So you're going through this process, disclose, and I completely agree, by the way, I coach the same thing. Disclose if you need it. Otherwise, I would recommend waiting until after you get an offer. It's just good advice because it's not just that people suck, right? Like a lot of times people discriminate without meaning to.
Correct.
And so it's just, they have assumptions or whatever. They saw a TV show with the diagnosis. And now they think they actually understand it. That's always one of my favorites. I cannot tell you how many people go, I say, I have OCD. Oh, like Monk.
No, but thank you.
Kind of.
Not quite, but I appreciate you trying.
But thank you for trying to relate it. And it's okay. Like they're really trying to connect, so it's okay. But it's just, but don't. I do recommend don't disclose until after you've been hired because that does. That can create some issues. But do always ask for what you need when you need it. You want to be your best self. I have a whole thing for the other side of that for the company side, but for the candidate side, that's what I'm going to stick to. So now they're asking for what they need, but how do you communicate your skills? Because especially as neurodivergents, we can have backgrounds and skill sets that are so wildly diverse. Like I literally, if I put all the stuff I can do on a resume, every single person that looked at it that doesn't know me would go, you're lying. Like they would hands down just go, there's no way you have made this up. So, and I'm not the only neurodivergent like that. I would be very clear. This is not a brag. This is just a statement of fact because we do such different things, right? And a lot of times we get accused of being job hoppers. I'm like, dude, you just try different things. Like I don't get the big deal with that. But anyway, so how do you coach people to express those skills and to showcase what they can do in a way that's actually effective in the job search process?
Let me use an example from athletes because I think that's the one that's honestly been the toughest transition for a lot of folks in general. So majority of the athletes that I work with, and I still consult with athletes on the side, and the majority of athletes will come to me and say, the only thing I'm good at is my sport. I'm good at that. I'm good at nothing else. I have no other skills to offer into the workspace. And I'm like,
oh God.
Yeah, you do. We just need to find a way to communicate them and have you understand that those are valuable in the workforce and not just in the athletic space. So as an example, I ask every athlete that I work with when they tell me I don't have any skills, I'll say, okay, when was the last time you received feedback from your coach? And they would say, oh, last night in practice, 2 days ago in practice. And I'll say, how many times a minute or how many times throughout the entire length of your practice? Let's say you had a practice for 2 hours long. How often did you receive feedback from your coach in that 2-hour time frame? And most athletes will say, oh, like at least once a minute, every few minutes kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'll say, great. So what that tells me is that you were excellent at getting feedback, receiving feedback, and using that feedback to improve your performance. And they say, yeah, that makes sense. And I said, great. You know how many companies are looking for people like you? A lot.
Yeah.
The challenge is that when you get on the job, you're not going to get feedback nearly as often as you're getting in the athletic space. So that's going to be a transition moment that you're going to have to work with. However, when I talk about those skills are transferable. And I've always come from a background in sports psychology by saying these are life skills that we're teaching. It doesn't just relate to sport and athletics. If we're talking about communication, just because you're trying to communicate better with your coach or your leadership on the team doesn't mean that that's not applicable to any other place in the world and any other experience that you're having.
But let's also talk about, and first of all, I agree with you. And by the way, athletes are some of my favorite people to hire because they do have some excellent ability to take feedback and apply it. Absolutely. And all that kind of stuff. I wholeheartedly love hiring athletes. But I want to also talk about the other side of this is that let's not stretch, because one thing I've seen consistently in my career on the receiving end of these resumes and applications are people that have really stretched to get from point A to point B. And I'm like, I don't understand the journey that we took to make this into the skill.
Make it make sense.
Yeah, like that's not it. And one thing, and I'm gonna just put this out there, is, you know, because I see people telling like stay-at-home moms, oh, you are immediately ready to go in and be an executive at a company. I'm like, no, because it is a very different skill set. Now you have applicable skill sets from this to this, but let's be real clear that running a company is not the same thing as running your house. Those are not the same skill sets. And working with adult people who, by the way, can leave you at will is not the same thing as managing your 6-year-old child. So these are
some adults act like 6-year-olds.
They do. I was gonna say, so it can be applicable, but it doesn't mean that you're automatically ready to transfer. So make sure that you put the skill level where it belongs. So to use another example, I've done a lot of work with veterans, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that they come in, again, great with feedback. Like really take feedback so well.
Take it and they'll run with it today. You don't have to
run with it. They are on top of it. Huge fan. One of the things that I've worked with them consistently on is because a lot of them, not a lot, but a good number of veterans that I've worked with had leadership in the military.
Yes.
And one of the things I talked to them about is the parts of that skill that are so very applicable. And then let's also be realistic and talk about the skills you still have to learn, because in the military, you have to follow orders or you go to jail. So, it's a different thing. So we talk about then, okay, so your leadership skills are so strong here, right? This is so strong and powerful here. And you're a great motivator because you do have to motivate people really well, and like, here, go run towards this over here, even though that's super dangerous, or go do this task that very clearly nobody wants to do, right? So you do have to understand motivation and that type of thing. So it's a wonderful skill. So now how do we apply it when somebody can look at you and say, no,
you don't have
and there's how do we change that then, right?
Here's what I tell all the people I work with. I say, you can do as much as you can to advocate for your own skills and your own experiences. And you can try to convince the other person of it. But if their mind is closed to that, we can't convince them. And it's just a matter
of it. It's not even that it's not applicable, but how are you going to convince the person?
How are you going to convince somebody that maybe you don't know and you're just meeting them in an interview for the first time? How are you supposed to convince them when their mind is already closed off? And I've had these conversations with so many clients before, and they tell me, you know what, I really tried to advocate for my skills. I told them I am skilled in all of these technical skills of what they were exactly looking for on the job description. However, they couldn't see past this one element on my resume or this one element in my background. And I tell them, that's not the right company for you then. If they are not willing to see past that, and if they are not being open-minded, the recommendation or a thing I tell everyone I work with is when you are in the interview process, how you're treated in the interview process is very indicative of how you're treated on the job. So
Yes,
if you're not
it
treated
is.
respectfully in the actual interview process, and they're just discrediting all of your experience. I've had fellows come to me and say, at Pathrise, they've come to me and said, this recruiter just fully discredited all the work that I've done in these past few years. Now my confidence just took a nosedive because I don't understand. Am I really not qualified for these roles? And I'm like, no, you are, but they were probably looking for something so incredibly specific, and you didn't match what they were looking for, and they're ticking.
Or they don't understand how to actually analyze talent.
That too. And that's
quite possible.
I tell everybody there's good recruiters in the world. There's not so good recruiters in the world. And there's a lot of gray area in between.
A lot of gray area. God, let me tell you.
Yeah, we have to advocate for ourselves. And I tell people the way we can advocate for those skills is through experiences. So if we can tell tangible stories, and from the recruiter perspective, you've probably heard thousands of STAR stories and those behavioral responses that can help validate those skills.
It does help.
It does help. It does help. If at the same time, if it's not the proper story for that moment in time, or if it's not maybe as well put together as a story, it might not land as well.
So let's talk about, because for neurodivergence, telling stories can go awry.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Even down to, so I always love to use my friend Lisa Duke as an example. She's one of my favorite absolute humans. She has ADHD. I think I told you this when I first met you. She talks to me in what I call Candyland style. So you start here, and it's this weavy, windy, rainbowy thing that takes you through all these different roads. And sometimes you come back over here, and then you go back forward again, and then you weave and wind, and eventually you end up where you're supposed to be, right? Yes. And I absolutely love that about her. It is so fun and creative and fascinating, and it's like the best journey ever to go on with her, especially if I'm manic. But at a certain point in my mania, other points I can't follow her. But so as a neurodivergent, how do you keep it focused? Because it can be hard for people to follow that. The same thing. So some folks with autism, and again, not all, but some will monologue and they don't breathe when they're speaking. And also for other people with neurodiversities, they will pause, but they're not actually trying to stop. They're just like thinking, and then they intend to continue. So it feels like somebody's interrupting them when they jump in, but they're actually not. So how would you coach a neurodivergent person who has one of these communication styles to best communicate a story in an interview?
Excellent question. The way I frame it is let's get an idea of what the story is that you want to tell. And let's break it down into simple components. So in a lot of ways, the behavioral stories are taught in either the STAR format or the SOAR format. So the situation, task, action, result, or for SOAR, situation, obstacle, action, result. And I find if we can structure it in that way and create bullet points for ourselves in each of those sections, we can get to a clearer idea. For some people in the neurodiversity space, they feel really comfortable with scripts. I'm not comfortable with scripts when I'm in an interview. I like to free go it and just go.
But some people are. Yeah,
exactly. And I've worked with neurodiverse people that are like, absolutely not. Give me a script. I can read off the script or I can memorize it and I can feel confident in that response. So I also lean into like what makes you feel most comfortable with giving that response in the interview itself. For me, I like to have a light structure and have a light idea of what I'm going to say, have my main points that I'm going to touch on, but I might add in a little bit extra flair this time. The next time I might cut it down a little bit because of time. I kind of like to have that flexibility and to have that adaptability because that's where I shine too. I shine in those moments by being able to have that flexibility versus having super structure. Some people really like having that structure. So when I'm working with them, I say, we're going to have a script then. Now, I'm going to tell you, though, you have to practice the script. You're not just reading off the script and like,
don't read it. That's so off-putting. Yeah.
So we have to at least practice it a little bit so that we feel comfortable with the words that we're using. And the thing that I tell people is, I'll be the first one to identify that, like, there are times where I'm doing interview prep and I'm talking out my stories to myself and I'm saying, okay, here's a story I want to touch on. I have an idea that they're probably going to ask me about this today. So I'll be kind of leaning into it. You know, I've got 2 cats, so a lot of times I'll just talk to the cats if they're home, and I'll be like, oh, that's a great question. Thank you so much for asking me that. Here's how I would respond. And I lean into that. But there are times where I'm telling my story out loud to myself, and all of a sudden I'm using vocabulary that I would never typically use in these types of responses. And so I have to take note of that and go, what the heck are you doing, Cathlyn? Like, why are we using this fancy word that we didn't need to be using to get the point across? And that's
on that note, and for so many other reasons. First of all, folks, do not use AI to write this stuff for you. It will come across like AI did it. Trust me, we can hear it.
We know when it's done by AI.
And it doesn't come across right. However, there is a cool app, and there are a couple others that are similar. This is just my favorite one. It's called Storied, STORIED. And that app is a talk to text, but then it organizes the speech for you and help you like condense it, put it in bullet points, do all the cool stuff. And that can help you make a script that's in your words with your inflections and that will sound natural and without you having to type a whole bunch or anything like that. This is a very simple and I believe still free tool to use that I highly, highly, highly recommend because you want it to still feel like you. Yeah, that's so very important because people pick up on like the non-genuine thing. Now I will also say this. I've worked with some remarkably unique neurodivergent individuals over the years as candidates. And when you are really good, once you get to the point that you are really good at what you do, you can be a lot more demanding of how you do things. For instance, I once had a candidate, and this was a long time ago. Okay, I want to be clear about this. This was like 11 or 12 years ago before neurodiversity was much of a thing. And this guy was so good at what he did in IT that he was able to, with a major bank, I won't give any names, but with a major bank, tell them, I will not be participating in your interview process as it exists. This is how I get interviewed. Most of it's via email. You are allowed 1 Zoom interview. That is it. Once I come into your company, this is how I will be communicated with. And by the way, he got the job.
Yes.
So once you hit a certain level of expertise, you can pull some of that. Right. You can start to go, actually, this is how it is. And you don't even have to be snooty about it. And not that he was snooty, he was just very direct, but you don't have to be snooty about it. You just say, this is what works for me. And once you have a certain level of expertise and all that, people will go with it and go, oh, okay, cool. All right. That works with it because at that point, there is incentive to listen, but that's just how humans function. Until then, I always tell people, try to work as you can within the interview process. But again, back to accommodations, don't hesitate to say that doesn't work. Also, so back to, sorry, I kind of derailed there a little bit, but back to the writing of scripts and all that, and then using that to communicate skills. So, making whatever it is, like using the STAR method, using an app, just winging it, but kind of having an idea, that kind of thing. So let's say you're in the middle of telling one of your stories and you can tell that this is just not landing. Like you can see it on the person's face. They're kind of like trying to interrupt you. They're like, yeah, this isn't it.
Yeah.
How do you recommend that people start to pivot, or how do they address the problem? How do you advise people in that way?
I've actually had that myself where I'm telling a story in an interview and I can see it's not landing well. And I'm like, okay, either there's a miss somewhere. I'm not sure where. And, our brains are running so quickly. And so many thoughts and processing is happening so fast. And in so many ways I can get internal in my head. So I'm talking, but I'm still thinking internally and judging.
I do that too.
This is not happening. This is not going well, but I'm still telling my story and it's still popping out. Like, it's amazing. And, there are times where I've paused the story and have said, you know what? As I've just spoken through some of that story, I realized that might not be the best example. Would it be okay if I restarted my response and provided you a different story instead? 9 times out of 10, they're like, yes, absolutely.
Yes, that would be good because I don't know what that was.
And there's times where I've literally practiced that story so many times with mentors, with friends. I've practiced it myself. And I'm like, I know that this story lands. It's just not landing with this specific group or this specific person right now.
Yes. And so it does not mean that you're wrong. It's just, you have to remember every human on earth communicates and receives differently. So, and it can even be the day. It could be the day that you've caught them. Like maybe they just had some awful traumatic thing happen and they're just trying to get through the rest of their workday and they're just having trouble focusing on you.
Absolutely.
Right?
And I've walked into interviews where the interviewer has been really candid and said, you know what, I was up all night with my baby. I'm a little bit off today. You know, if I repeat a question to you, just know that it's not intentional. It's just I'm not on my A game today. And I love it when I have interviews.
I love that vulnerability. Yeah, that's great.
It levels everybody down rather than having to feel like you have to be at a certain level and it's unattainable. So a lot of times I've said to fellows and said to clients in general, and I've said to them, hey, if there's a way that you can kind of like save yourself, let's save ourselves. Don't tell the rest of the story and then try to save yourself, because now we're running out of time potentially. Or now we're running into, okay, well, you just gave like a response and that was a few minutes long. How long is this next response going to be? You know?
Yeah.
So if I see that it's not going well and it's maybe like a quarter, a third, halfway through of the story and it's not landing well, I pull the plug on it immediately.
Pull it back. Pull it back.
Say, okay, great. Let me find a different story that makes more sense to pull
and
out.
that leads into my last point that I want to make, because as awesome as it is talking to you, I could literally talk to you all day. We do have to wrap up. So my final point that I want to talk about is
which is wild.
this is such a thing for people in the neurodivergent community, even more so. I see it in neurotypical community too, but I see it so much in the neurodivergent community. This obligation to finish out an interview or an interview process even out of politeness. And I'm like, no. So I want to take a moment and give anyone watching this permission to stop an interview if something is said that is a hard boundary, you know that means you're not going to take the job, to not accept future interviews. If something has made you uncomfortable, if you can tell that's not a job for you, whatever, stop it dead. Do not waste a moment of your life on that. You do not owe that to somebody else. Your time is your most valuable possession. That is the most valuable asset that you have. Do not waste it. If you know it's not going to work, just be honest and tell the person, this just isn't the right fit for me. Thank you so very much for your time. I appreciated you. You were great. And
away you go. I've done it. I had a phone screening several years ago, and the interviewer was for a veteran role. I was going to be potentially career coaching with veterans, and I was excited about the position. Went into the phone screening. The interviewer hadn't even looked at my materials before. He's pulling up his resume as we're talking. He's asking me like, so how are you qualified for the job and all those things.
I hate that.
But I'm like, you didn't even look at my resume like at all. And so we finally get to the point where he says, oh, you have a certain career coaching certification that isn't in line with the position. And I said, yes. Well, in the job description, I did see it said or relevant. And so this is my relevant certification.
Yeah, this is my or relevant. Yeah.
It's literally from the same organizing, not committee, but the same organization. It's the same. It's just a different certification because my education was slightly different. So that's why I have one versus a different. And he literally said to me, well, then you wouldn't be qualified for this position. And I said, okay, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Please let me know if anything changes with that or if there's any other roles. And he goes, wait, you don't want to talk further? And I
Why
said,
would I? Like you literally just told me.
You literally just told me this certification that you're asking for on the job description is a make or break it moment. Why would you spend the time talking?
Why would I do that? I had the same kind of thing. I had somebody a long time ago that was interviewing me for a recruiting job, dropped on me early in the call that they all, it was early in the call, that they also wanted that you to do sales and bring in clients, which to me, I'm like, first of all, why would I do sales and recruiting? Why would I not just then work for myself? And why would I give you anyway, but I said, I'm sorry. And I clarified, I said, that's a requirement for the role. Yes. I said, okay, in that case, I'm no longer interested in the position, but thank you so much for your interest. I appreciate your time. By the way, you had a great intro, because she had a great intro to the call. I said, thank you so very much. She goes, wait, like, you don't want to, I said, no, I said, I have no interest in doing sales. So this isn't therefore a deal breaker for me, but thank you again so much for your time. And it was like, And later she sent me an email. I could tell she was kind of shocked at the time, but later I got an email that was like, thank you. You know what? Actually, thank you. And it was really great to meet you. And thank you so much for your honesty. I really appreciated it. So I give you all permission to be honest, not waste your time, do your thing. If you want more help getting yourself together for a career, because it's not easy. And this job market is unlike anything we've ever seen. I've spoken to people across the nation who have been in recruiting and HR for years and years. All of us are going, what the actual F is this? It's crazy right now. So if you would like help, highly recommend Cathlyn. She is very cool, very clearly knows her stuff. She does not suck also, which is very nice. And she has cute kitty cats.
Yes.
Also a cool side note. So
I think I had one nearby.
So Cathlyn, how would they find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. That's the best way to get in contact with me if you have questions, comments, concerns, anything. If there's anything I can help with, I'm just Cathlyn Stahl on LinkedIn. That's honestly one of the best ways to get in touch with me. And honestly, similar to what you just mentioned, I give every single person full permission. If it's not an interview process that makes sense for you, pull out. As long as you're doing it in a respectful way, that's all I say. Just do it in a respectful way. Thank them for their time, your consideration, all of that, but do it in a respectful way. Don't just say, I'm out, peace. Do it in a better way. And then you're not burning bridges down the line. But seriously, get in contact with me if any questions come up. I'm an advocate for this. I work with a lot of diverse populations in general, but specifically I have a lot of folks that I work with in the neurodiversity community. I'm an advocate for it. So absolutely, if you need help, if you just need to know how to go about a situation, shoot me a message. Let me know. Let's talk through it together.
And same. And especially in companies, if you're listening to this and going, gosh, I want to know more about how to better interview these folks, whatever, that's my department. Reach out to me. I'm also on LinkedIn and all over the place. So you can find either one of us there. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Have a happy, safe weekend. And I will talk to you again soon, I'm very sure. Bye.